Dear colleagues, dear friends, welcome to everybody. My name is Christian Hofer. I'm the Director General of the Federal Office for Agriculture of Switzerland. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the final session of the third global conference of the One Planet Network Sustainable Food Systems Programme, entitled Our Commitment for a Sustainable Food Future, which is the co-organized by the co-leads of the Sustainable Food Systems Programme, Costa Rica, WWF, and Switzerland, and the 2021 Food Systems Summit Secretariat. After 2 weeks of intense discussions, today's session will bring together the outcomes of all previous sessions and aim to feed them into the process for the Food Systems Summit. In particular, we will have the pleasure to welcome on our panel the chairs of vice chairs of group and of all Summit Action Track, as well as the chair of the Summit's scientific group. And they will offer us insights from their work as well as their reflections on the conclusions of the SFS Programmes conference. The topic of the present session is therefore of high relevance with regard to the Food Systems Summit. The objectives of this session are therefore twofold, namely. First, to discuss the necessary measures for food systems transformation through cross-cutting dialogue among the chairs and vice chairs of the Food Systems Summit Action Tracks, as well as the chair of the Summit's scientific group. And second, to feed the key conclusions of the present conference into the 2021 Food Systems Summit process. We will start with a first round of discussion with the panel, after which we will hear a series of brief video messages from the chairs of all previous sessions, including the first Global Food Systems Dialogue that was hosted by the conference on Tuesday. Thereafter, we will move into a second round of discussion with the panelists. And finally, if we are doing well in terms of time management, there will be a third round where the panelists will be responding to questions submitted by the audience. In this regard, please note that throughout the session, you will have the possibility to submit questions via the chat box. Then, after the panel discussions, towards the end of the session, our dear colleagues and co-leads of the One Planet Network's Sustainable Food Systems Programme from Costa Rica will read the official outcome document of the third global conference to all participants. Now I would like to open the first part of the panel discussion. And for that, please let me first introduce the panelists who will be taking part in it. First, Joachim von Braun, Director, Center for Development Research at the Bonn University, Chair of the Scientific Group for the UN Secretary General's Food Systems Summit. Hi, Joachim. Then Lawrence Haddad, Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, GAIN. Chair Action Track 1, Ensure Access to Safe and Nutritious Food for All. Lawrence, he will leave soon because he has another action. He will be replaced later by Sheryl Hendricks. Hi, Lawrence. Then Ajay Jaakar, Chairman, Bharat Skrinshak Shamai, Vice Chair Action Track 2, Shift to Sustainable Consumption Patterns. Maybe you can spell your name a little bit cleaner than I do. Then fourth, Xiao Kampari, Global Leader Food Practice, WWF, Chair Action Track 3, Boost Nature Positive Production. Then Chacontala Tillstadt, Program Leader for Value Chains and Nutrition, World Fish, Vice Chair Action Track 4, Advance Equitable Livelihood. And the last one, Salim Haq, Director, International Center for Climate Change and Development, Chair Action Track 5, build resilience for vulnerabilities, shocks, and stress. So, and in this first part of the discussion, the panelists will discuss the role of urgency of food systems transformation in achieving the 2030 agenda from the point of view of their respective action tracks. So, I will ask each panelist 3 questions, and they will have the time of 4 minutes to respond to these questions. These questions are: what will need to be done for the Food Systems Summit in 2021 to succeed in making sustainable food systems transformation happen? The second question: what strategies need to be followed to achieve a critical mass of member states, companies, financial institutions, and other stakeholders to change course? And the third question: how will their respective action tracks, the scientific group, contribute to that? So I first ask Joachim to give his answers. Please, Joachim.
First of all, thank you for having us. It's tremendously helpful to have this exchange in the pathways towards the food systems pre-summit and summit. We have a sense of urgency to get to a sustainable and nutritious food system, but we also have the sense of urgency to get our job done, because there's only half a year from now that a defining pre-summit and then the summit in September will take place. So we need a lot of such dialogues and follow-ups to them. My first point is this food system summit process is evidence and science guided, and that's important. Secondly, it needs to be broad-based in stakeholder communities, people, business, government. The priorities that need to be achieved relate to investment and mobilizing the finance for useful steps in 3 areas. We don't enter this debate from square one. We can draw on a rich background experience and science. 3 areas need to be invested in big and quickly and long term. One is agriculture and production innovations for sustainable production, and including in the small farm sector, sustainable land and water use. Secondly, the empowerment of women, the education and extension systems. And third, quickly scaling up social protection systems so that equity and livelihoods happen. All of this needs to happen not over the next 10 years towards 2030, but early on in this decade, because the long-term investment that give us a sustainable food system, environmentally and ecologically and climate resilient and climate positive food system, take time. So we need to front load. That's my main message. We need to front load all these investments in the coming 5 years. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Joachim, for this very important input. Then I give the floor to Lawrence Haddad. Please, Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Joachim, as well. I completely agree with what Joachim has said. In terms of making sure this front loading happens, I think there are 3 things that are really critical for next year and for now. First, we have to build a groundswell for change. Not enough people are thinking about food systems, not enough people are thinking about the problems that food systems currently generate, and not enough people are thinking and talking about the potential solutions. So we need to get people thinking and talking about this beyond groups like this. This is very important. We are insiders. We need to get broad society talking about these issues. We need to puncture public consciousness in the same way that the climate movement has been able to do. Second thing we need to do is surface, develop, and operationalize solutions that are potentially impactful at scale. They're evidence-based. They are actionable by member states and by other key stakeholders such as businesses, civil society, and development partners. And they need to be sustainable. Sustainable in the sense that they won't just fade away once the energy of the summit fades away. The summit will have been a catalyst, and the solutions have momentum and have legs to keep going to 2030 and actually beyond 2030. And I think the third thing that's really essential is a strong accountability mechanism. I've been to many summits where ideas are put forward at summits, but that's all they are, ideas. These need to be solutions that are backed by a sensible, well thought through, practical, ambitious operationalization plan that says, this is how much this is going to cost, this is who's going to do what, and this is how we're going to fund it, and this is what success looks like, and this is how we're going to measure it. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Lawrence, for this also very important input. Then I give the floor to Ajay Jaakar, please.
Yes, I'm Ajay Jaakar, and I work with the farmers organization in India. I think what is most required for the Food System Summit to be a success, to be a people's summit, is that we need to create trust amongst the citizens of the planet in the system to deliver for them. I think there's a great trust deficit today. We need to, at the same time, get commitments from the private sector, get commitments from various governments to commit to guidelines and to ideas that will emerge from the system. And also, we will need to not shy away from decisions which may not be acceptable to many societies or many sections of maybe for the private sector, maybe for governments. We do not need to try and get negotiated settlements. We need to get actionable ideas which can be implemented, and we must have them that can be measured. I think so. These are three things I would say is that we need to develop trust, we need to get commitments from the private sector and government, and we need to get enforceable regulations. And this is a big field that needs to be looked at. Also, we may need to look at something that has been taken for granted for the last many decades. There have been many ideas which have been propagated again and again, year after year, decade after decade. They could be international trade treaties. They could be how money is channelized to the private sector for delivery and trickle-down effects to the economy. I think all these things will need to be thought about, and nothing is off the table, and it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jai. So we give the floor to Xiao Kampari, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Delighted to be here with everyone. I think first and foremost, for this summit to be meaningful, not only successful, but really meaningful, we need to recognize time. Sometimes we talk about solutions, we talk about the material aspects of what we are doing, but we fail to recognize the urgency of the problem that we are facing. When you look at the Sustainable Development Agenda, the SDGs, we have 10 years, to deliver the SDGs. And if you are a farmer or a fisher, this means that you have 9 harvests to either deliver or miss the Sustainable Development Goals. Not you, but us from the world, actually. So there is real urgency in delivering, the material aspects of the summit. The second aspect that I would like to highlight is that to do so at the speed at which this is required, the aspects of collaboration cannot be underestimated. Collaboration between different stakeholders at a scale that we've never experienced before is a must. And this needs to be, stakeholders need not to defend their own shop their own, their own agenda, but really move away from compartmentalized thinking and embrace the problem as a whole and build, solutions that cuts across sectors. And the third aspect of this is that pragmatism. We need to focus on pragmatism, and sometimes we keep focused on game-changing solutions. They are great, and I totally think that they need to happen. But game-changing could simply be removing some of the lock-ins, some of the barriers that prevent good ideas and good solutions that are already out there from surfacing, from emerging. So more important than coming up with new ideas is to remove these barriers, the systemic lock-ins that keep us, going on the status quo. Thank you, Chairman. Back to you.
Thank you, Xiao. Then I give the floor to Chacontala Tillstadt, please.
Thank you. So if I would say why I'm engaged in the Food Systems Summit and why I want to work with this, I'd say it's because I'm looking forward to that this Food Systems Summit leads to everyone having access to healthy, nutritious food. And those who work in the food systems earn a fair wage for their work, and those who produce food get a fair price for their produce. In essence, as we've heard so much before in lots of international meetings and conferences, that we'd like to have use the structures of the right to food, and that no one is left behind. In this particular case, with respect to healthy, nutritious foods on plate for all, fair wages, and fair price for produce, I'd like to make mention of particular groups. For example, women, indigenous peoples, and the youth. And we know from lots of the work that has been done by Lawrence Haddad, that if women earn a fair wage, if they're in a better position to take care of them in the food systems, then they're in a better position to afford safe and nutritious foods for themselves and for their families. So I think there's a particular reference to be made so that women have a special role and have a special place within these negotiations and discussions on the Food Systems Summit. If, for example, they would own the land on which they farm and have access to resources such as water, such as better plants and animals, we know that this would go a much better way into having better food systems for all and also better conditions for women. So the dreams that I look forward to is that people can feed themselves with dignity and respect, and they can work within the food systems with dignity and respect. If I should choose 3 issues that I would like to highlight, one is the change relationships between different groups. The relationships such as power relationships between those who have and those who have not, those who have power over others as to what they do or do not do into food systems. The second point that I would like to use and to have highlighted is how do we transform structures so that they became more fair and it's equal for all. For example, we know we have exclusionary practices. We know that there are laws and policies which discriminate. So if we can transform these structures, then it can be better for all, and the food systems can work better. The third point I would like to make, and this is also coming from the Action Track 4, which is more people-centered, is build agency. Build agency among individuals, household members, and within communities. If you build agencies where people have more confidence, more self-esteem, their capacity is better, they have knowledge and skills and capabilities, then all of these will go towards making better food systems for themselves, their communities, and for all in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much for also this information and these answers. And now we are at Salim Haq. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Salim Haq. I'm the Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development, and I'm the Chair of Action Track 5, which is on resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks and stresses. And in terms of the overall outcome of the summit, I want to reiterate what other speakers have said, is that we want to see actions coming out and not just a statement that countries can sign up to. Too many summits that I have been to end up with a statement and then not much happens afterwards. I'm certainly not interested in that. And I think the fact that our tracks are called action tracks, to me, that's the most important word, the action track of the bit. We want to see actions going on. The second outcome-oriented thought I have is that this cannot be done by governments alone. This will need stakeholders across the world, across many different sectors. Private sector has been mentioned, the farmers and fishers in all the continents around the world, and just citizens of the globe. We are now in an interconnected world in a way that we've never been before, and we need to take that into account. And hence, systems is the second major word that I would focus on, which we have not done in the past. We've looked at things in silos and groups, but not looked at them as systems. And then finally, on the adaptation track 5 on resilience, my own area of focus is to ensure that food systems, by and large, are resilient to future shocks, vulnerabilities, and stresses. And we are seeing one of them right now as we speak, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is causing a major a dent and a shock to the system, global health system, but also the global food system. And we are going to have to deal with that as we come out of the COVID situation, hopefully sooner rather than later. But then also even bigger upcoming impacts are going to be from climate change. And unlike COVID-19, where we hopefully now have a vaccine, climate change, we don't have a vaccine. We're going to have to be better prepared for it and deal with it without having a vaccine to come to our rescue. So from a very personal perspective, in terms of what I would like to see coming out of the Food System Summit as a whole, and in particular from my action track number 5 on resilience, is to ensure that the poorest people on the planet, whether they be poor producers, farmers, fishers, herders, pastoralists, or consumers of food and get balanced nutrition. These two, to me, we have to change that. Then to me, the summit will be a failure, no matter what other, big ideas we come up with and game changer things we come up with. The delivery of those is going to be the test of whether or not we are a success. And I agree with Lawrence, we need to have some kind of means of monitoring and measuring that success post-summit. And it's the post-summit period that is the most important, rather than the summit itself, that I am interested in. Thank you.
So thank you very much for all your valuable contributions on the issue of food systems transformation and its role in achieving the 2030 agenda from the point of view of your respective action track, respectively the scientific group of the Food System Summit. We heard about different aspects like consciousness, let the people thinking and talking about. Speed was an aspect that was mentioned, pragmatism, the science-based discussions, fair prices, And I think we heard a lot of time that we want to see action at the end. We want to see action. That means that the post-summit time is very important, that there are not only strategies, that there is action in the field. So thank you very much for all these different aspects you answered to the different questions. Now I would like to move on to the next part of today's program. We have invited all chairs of the previous conference sessions to prepare a short. They present their key conclusions as an input for the next round of this panel discussion. So I invite you to listen to this reporting from the conference. I think there should now, we should see the different videos.
My name is Chancellor Kriel, and I'm Deputy Director of IPES Food, the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. And I moderated the second session of our conference on aligning collective action to achieve the SDGs. In light of the UN Food Systems Summit, I wanted to recap the discussions of our session with the following two related points that were brought up by our speakers. First, when we talk about food systems transformation, we are dealing with a series of interrelated issues and crises. This means that we have to address these challenges in an integrated and a comprehensive way. To do this, we need to keep fostering spaces for policy redesign and experimentation. It was brought up by our speakers that these spaces already exist today in the form of multi-stakeholder governance mechanisms. And these can include local food policy councils, processes to develop national food policies, or the Committee on World Food Security at the international level. What we need to do is encourage these types of spaces to continue growing and to continue guiding us in the right direction. Secondly, the basis of food system sustainability, and therefore of the UN Food Systems Summit, must be rooted in transparent and accountable governance. This means ensuring that the collective actions that we take are truly participatory, inclusive, and broad-based. We also need to share knowledge. We need to correct current power imbalances in food systems decision-making. And right now, especially in a time where we're all meeting virtually, part of that means ensuring that these discrepancies are not exacerbated by a digital divide. We need to ensure that we find ways to center the voices of those who've been most marginalized by current food system practices in our discussions. This means ensuring that their priorities are heard and accounted for in our solutions, so that they're truly representative of everyone who has a stake in our food systems. We need to be ambitious because the challenges we face are becoming urgent, and the approaches we need to underpin food systems transformation are right in front of us. With that, I'd like to thank our conference organizers for a great conference, and I look forward to more fruitful discussions with all of you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Elise Golan, the Director of Sustainable Development at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and one of the co-organizers for Session 3. In Session 3, the science track of the conference, we examined the science underlying global and local efforts to characterize and assess progress towards more sustainable food systems. One of the key messages from the session is that we expect a lot from our food systems, or at least from sustainable food systems. We expect these systems to deliver on goals related to providing everyone with affordable, nutritious food for healthy diets, ensuring that farmers and workers across the food system have decent and equitable livelihoods, and that natural resources are conserved. To measure our success in building more sustainable food systems, we therefore use indicators that reflect a wide variety of goals across all three dimensions of sustainable development: social, economic, and environmental. The multiple goals for sustainable food systems, the fact that we expect so much from them, puts us in the difficult position of seeking to optimize outcomes across multiple dimensions in incredibly dynamic systems under a great amount of uncertainty. Rocket scientists do not deal with more complicated dynamic optimization problems than the ones we are grappling with. So have we set ourselves an impossible task? No, we can do it. The discussions in Session 3 revealed 3 key steps that can help. First, to move forward together, we need to recognize that in the transition to more sustainable food systems, Any single policy tool or project will likely entail trade-offs and unintended impacts that make some people worse off, particularly in the short term. Policy cannot be successful unless these trade-offs are identified and managed in an inclusive way that values the voices of stakeholders across the system. Second, there aren't any silver bullet policy prescriptions. The transition to more sustainable food systems depends on policies that target the objectives identified by a system's stakeholders and reflect the social, cultural, economic, and environmental realities of the communities in which they are implemented. And third, identification of trade-offs not only helps to target policy, it helps to target scientific research to problem areas in the food system. Well-targeted science is foundational to inclusive, holistic transformation to more sustainable food systems. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. My name is Thanawat Tiensin, the chairperson of the Committee on World Food Security, CFS. I'm also the permanent representative of Thailand to the United Nations agencies in Rome. In session 4 of the third Global Conference, One Planet Sustainable Food Systems Programme, we spoke about holistic policy for food system transformation, and all speakers highlighted the trade-offs of policy making. After every policy, there is always someone who is winning and someone who is losing in the short, medium, and long terms. Therefore, it is important for policymakers to fully assess these trade-offs before they take any policy decision. For this, they need data, they need tools, and they also need to listen to all voices, especially the voices of all marginalized and vulnerable people. Permanent multi-stakeholder platform like the Committee on World Food Security, CFS, may help national and local governments to stimulate productive dialogues between all stakeholders and promote coherence and integration among different food system policies. During the session, this message clearly came across, and it strongly resonates to me. The 2021 UN Food System Summit must create opportunities to conduct local, national, and global dialogues on food systems that are truly inclusive and involve all relevant actors. We need to ensure that all voices are heard. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Rex Raymond of the Transformational Investing in Food Systems Initiative. That is an allied initiative of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. Participants in session 5 of the Global Conference discussed investing in food systems transformations. They discussed examples of how farmers and entrepreneurs worldwide produce food and create business models that improve the lives of people, build community, and heal soils and restore natural resources using agroecological, regenerative, and indigenous knowledge. Private investors such as institutions, banks, philanthropies, and public investors such as bilateral and multilateral institutions should respond to those opportunities by creating appropriate financial products that reduce risk and support positive outcomes in natural, human, and social capital. Better alignment of public and private finance is critical, for instance, through blended capital vehicles, and tools that use true cost accounting should be used to identify good investments. And finally, national governments play an important role in removing systemic policy and institutional barriers to catalytic finance.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ulf Jekyll. I work for the Ministry for the Environment in Germany, and I'm also serving as a co-lead of the Consumer Information Program under the One Planet Network. I had the pleasure to share session number 6, Addressing Sustainable Food Systems Through Consumer and Consumer Information. The session was part of the cooperation activities of the Consumer Information Program and the Sustainable Food Systems Program under the One Planet Network. What role does consumer information or information play for realizing sustainable food systems? We had panelists from 4 continents, and it was clear there is some common ground, but there's definitely also not one-size-fits-all solution to the issue. The key issues we discussed in our session were that, of course, information is key to help consumers to make informed choices, to distinguish between sustainable options and not so sustainable ones. But that does not mean that the burden is put on the consumers. Policy producers, retailers, and also restaurant and canteen managers have to provide transparent and reliable information so that the consumers can act accordingly. An important issue in our session was also the food waste. It has to be addressed, and it is addressed also by a lot of measures from companies to the policy side. But there's still more action needed to avoid food waste to a greater extent. Also important is education as a necessary basis so that information falls on a fertile ground. So there are a lot of activities already out there on policy and business side, but much more is needed. Thank you very much.
Good day to all. My name is Tineke Unema and I'm the coordinator of the UNSCN. I will present the outcomes of session 7. At the very start of this conference, Francesco Branca highlighted the importance of public procurement as a game-changing solution for food system transformation. He specifically highlighted food procurement for school settings. Schools can be seen as a system to improve nutrition and deliver the sustainable healthy diets. Especially the homegrown programs offer a powerful tool to achieve the sustainable development goals, and their impact cut across all action tracks of the Food System Summit. It simultaneously ensures access to safe and nutritious foods for children. It shifts their diets towards sustainable consumption patterns, and it supports local livelihoods and sustainable production. Session 7 highlighted that school meal programs, especially homegrown school meal programs, financed through public procurement, offer low-hanging fruit to push for transformation towards sustainable, healthy food systems. To achieve their full potential, key actions need to be taken. Governments should develop the policy and regulatory framework that include health and sustainability criteria. Governments must also convene multiple stakeholders and initiatives in a coordinated way to harness the momentum that is already underway. Also, Jamie Morrison in session 4 emphasized the need for alignment of actions and coherent indicators to achieve sustainable transformation. For school meal programs, this requires the establishment of joint recommendations, targets, and indicators to ensure programs harness the potential of public procurement to work as triple duty action to tackle undernutrition, prevent overweight and obesity, and protect planetary health. Session 7 called for a global framework for action on sustainable and healthy school meals, which drives these actions as well as be driven by them. This framework would bring to scale the huge potential of school meal programs and create a game-changing solution to be included in the Food System Summit outcomes. For the shorter term, it ensures no child is left behind, and for the longer term, it enables sustainable, healthy diets for all. Thank you.
Hello, my name is David Nabarro. On December the 1st, we had the first Global Food System Summit dialogues, and these were to link together the findings of the Sustainable Food Systems Programme and the Food System Summit 2021 being organised by the United Nations Secretary General. More than 100 leaders from food systems around the world took part in these dialogues. They explored the challenges of food systems, but also recognized that systems need to shift and need to shift in a wholesale way if there's also going to be the emergence of sustainability in food systems in line with the Sustainable Development Agenda. But meeting together in small groups of about 10 each discussion group. They looked at some of the challenges in food systems and how they've got to shift to reach a destination that is more sustainable in 10 years' time. And to do that, they made unusual connections between different groups of stakeholders. They rejoiced in diversity. They recognized that there's not always convergence when it comes to systems shifting. And they saw the significance of links between what is happening locally and globally in our world. I think this approach of multi-stakeholder dialogue is really helping with enabling groups of people to shift systems simultaneously through connecting, through exploring, through identifying in a respectful way. They see opportunities for change, and the openness and welcoming nature of the dialogues was fantastic. They felt it, they did it, and they're going to do it some more in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
So many thanks for all this reporting and these very interesting key conclusions to all of us. We see that in these groups there were big discussions, a lot of information that was discussed, and if I see the outcome, it is really very fruitful what we heard. There were very important aspects like the aspect of moving together. We should move together. That means we should take the people with us, that they are conscious about what we should do and what are really the good solutions. Communication is a very important thing. Communication is, I think, the most important thing that is really helping to make the people consciousness. We heard from the consumer side that there is not one solution, one size fits solution. That means there are different solutions possible, and we should discuss the different solutions that make it possible. And also education, that all this information that we are discussing is at the end on a fertile soil, on a fertile ground, that the people understand what is healthy and a future where we are looking good for our environment. So, but it's not to me to make a conclusion. It's I want to shift back, to go back to our panelists. I would like to ask each of you about which of the key conclusions presented by the session chairs resonate most with you and are most relevant in terms of your action tracks, respectively the scientific group. So there, I asked every panelist to give some response in 3 minutes to the different messages we heard before from these group leaders. So I give the floor first to Joachim von Braun. Please, Joachim.
Thank you, Christian. Were fascinating and important insights which we heard from the 7 speakers. And I will make sure that these messages will also be conveyed to the scientific group and our partners with which the scientific group collaborate. By the way, the scientific group are 29 internationally well-known academics and scientists, hundreds, if not thousands of others in the community. Let me pick the point on finance, which I found very important, made on innovation in finance in order to get capital mobilized, is being discussed too little. We research on the record that incremental annual investment of $40 to $50 billion is needed in order to achieve an optimal investment portfolio that gives us a food secure world by 2030. The donor community would have to invest 14 billion out of these 40 to 50. So we have to talk about money. After all, we are in a Swiss environment, and I hope you don't mind that I raise the money issue. The second issue which I want to raise is the excellent points on governance. The governance issues, transparency, and the knowledge system driving the food system transformation needs to change. We need to copy what the governance system has created around the climate agenda. We need something like an IPCC for food, so that science has a clear and permanent voice, evidence-based, and has a structured dialogue with all other stakeholders, rather than being occasionally included in this or that committee framework. And the third one, which I, if you give me the chance, want to reflect on, is the consumer side. Very important. We need sustainable consumption patterns to shift to. We need to overcome the food waste and losses issues with strong incentives and investments. And that also requires transparency for fair and just value chains to overcome exploitation, modern slavery, and that is so important in order to keep a trading world moving, because a food secure world needs trade integration, but on solid grounds and with transparency and a rule-based trade system for food, for efficiency and safety and food security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joachim. Then I give the floor to Sheryl Hendricks. Sheryl Hendricks, you're new in our group here. You replaced Lawrence Haddad. Sheryl Hendricks is the head of the Department of Agricultural Economics, Extension and Rural Development at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. And she leads the Action Track 1, Ensure Access to Safe and Nutrition Food All. So there is also a link to the scientific group. Hello, Sheryl, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to participate. I step into some very big shoes. So some elements really struck me. 2 points that we expect so much at this time in great uncertainty really stood out. And I think David Nabarro's point on a wholesale shift really does bring to the fore the responsibilities of everybody in the food system. So this particular moment gives us an opportunity to think in a much more holistic and integrated way that is also inclusive. So there are a number of different angles to the point at which we're at now. So this responsibility really struck me in terms of the discussions on policy redesign and experimentation, and how we need to look very carefully at the trade-offs, but not only from the scientific perspective. These complex trade-offs will need to be discussed and dialogued with the people who will be affected by these particular trade-offs. We know for sure there's not going to be one solution, and that context really does matter. That came quite strongly through the consumer groups report back. I like the idea of the framework, a global framework for action for school meals, but I think this should be extended beyond school meals to help with especially early childhood development and shaping the consumption behavior and knowledge of the next generation of parents. So perhaps reaching far more institutional settings than just schools, including workplaces where people are able to learn new habits and to experiment perhaps with changing diets. So shifting consumption patterns is going to take a huge amount of effort from everybody involved, from consumers to the private sector to the institutional setting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sheryl, for your answers and your response to the group leaders. We go to the next, to Ajay Jaakar. Please, it's your floor.
Thank you, Chair, for this. One of the important things is sustainable consumption, of which I'm associated with as an action track, which have been covered to some extent by Ms. Hendricks and Mr. Brown, I will want to use this opportunity to talk about what I understand from the presentations as a farmer, because I'm a farmer in the action tracks. One common thread that came again and again in the conversations was recognition that there will be trade-offs and the systems have to be inclusive, that nobody is left behind, and there are no silver bullets. So I would want to just spend the next 2-3 minutes talking about the irony of things that need to be addressed. The number of people who are hungry are increasing in the last few years, and most of those who are hungry are the ones who are actually supposed to be producing the food, and those who are obese are the ones who are buying the food and that they're consumers. So this is one irony of the food systems that we are facing. And also what we face is that failing food systems are driving people into poverty, accumulating into the largest migration I see in the villages in human history. There's a silent migration from farms to urban spaces because the livelihood component is not coming in the food systems debates that are happening. It's basically the food system debates are focusing on food, and they're not focusing on the livelihood component of the food systems, of the producers themselves. And as a farmer, I feel that till the point that we do not talk about their livelihood issues, as one of the speakers in the video had said, was that it needs to be every part of the system value chain needs to benefit. So in these trade-offs, the fear is that the benefits never reach down to the last point of the farmer on the field. And this is what I take from this debate, is that we need to make sure that in the trade-offs, if there are trade-offs in the food systems, we make sure that the producer is at the heart of it. And the last point I would say is, if you look at the facts, that more and more farmers today are dependent on market forces for nutrition. So we need a relook, not only a relook, we need to reevaluate the whole thing, get the scientific groups to find the evidence that is there, to come out with game-changing solutions which don't necessarily look at food value chains as a priority, but look at creating farmers as a priority for improving nutritional self-reliance on the farm, for building wet markets, for community networks to improve nutrition. And this needs a completely different approach. And we need to get voices of communities which would normally not be captured by dialogues happening with multilateral agencies as in the past. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ajay, for this voice of the farmer. I think that's a very important input also for the further discussion. So then I give the floor to Joao Campari. Please, it's your floor.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I'm the chair of the Action Track 3, which is aimed to boost nature-positive production. But my day job is to be the global leader of WWF's food program. And if I have to wear my environmentalist lenses to interpret the conclusions that we just heard from the sessions, you know, I would say that all of them are important, but it resonates to me that from the environmental perspective, while we can and should phase out of fossil fuels, we cannot phase out of food. So we better make the food system work for nature and people. So that's my first reflection. I think, you know, when I heard all the conclusions, that's what I'm taking home. There are a few conclusions that I heard that I would like to highlight in that context. First is the need to embed food systems in all relevant multilateral platforms. You know, we know that how we produce and consume food is the single biggest threat to nature and a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions today. Yet such frameworks, such as the Global Biodiversity Framework and the nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement, have overlooked this system somewhat, the food system somewhat. You know, we need to change that. Until food is also championed through these processes, we may struggle to achieve the transformation at the scale and urgency that we need to. So I welcome Joaquin's point, especially about us looking forward and change the game and build an IPCC for food, or an IPCC equivalent for food. So the second point that I'd like to make is that food systems governance must be participatory, inclusive, and broad-based. We have to engage stakeholders from everywhere, from small farmers, artisanal fishers, processors along the supply chain, and consumers from all backgrounds. We can't just rely on government and big businesses to do the job. We all have individual power to influence food systems by making good choices about what we eat, by choosing our diets, and this connects, with Action Track 2 and 1. But the same virtue, if we fail to address power imbalances in the food system and actively engage everyone, including those who are excluded from the system today, that go hungry every day, we will never have a truly sustainable food system. The third reflection is that food systems are dynamic, and we must keep dialogue with scientists open. The key here is that we are informed by science. The evidence today is clear. If we all listen to the science, we would likely see more meaningful transformation. As new evidence is presented, we must continue to evolve our thinking and production practices. And just to reiterate what AJ and what I heard from other speakers, trade-offs must be identified and considered, and the synergies as well. There are trade-offs both within the food system, for instance, in terms of productivities versus nutrition versus livelihoods versus resilience, and beyond the food system, like limiting global warming and reversing biodiversity loss, most obviously. Solutions will not be perfect, but we have to make decisions with our eyes open and understand the trade-offs, that trade-offs will inevitably occur, and support those who are most adversely affected and assist them as we make systemic changes in the food system. So these are my reflections from what I heard from the conclusions. Back to you, Chair.
So thank you very much, Joao, also for this important and interesting point. This point of trade-offs, I must say, I work all day with these trade-offs, and it's really the point that you must discuss it and at the end making decisions, because if you talk too long about these trade-offs, at the end there are no decisions, and then we're back at the end. We need action on and not only talking. Thank you very much. So then we go to Chacontala Tillstadt. The next one, the floor is yours. Thank you. You are on mute, please. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought I was unmuted. Thank you so much, Chair. I'll first give my reflections of 3 points which I consider important from what I've heard, and then I'll talk a little bit about the Action Track 4, which I represent. So the first of the 3 points that I'd like to take into consideration is who gets a space at the table with respect to this food summit, and a space to be listened to and a space to learn from. Because I do think that, yes, we need science, we need evidence and data on which we can draw solutions, but we also need that these solutions emanate from those who sit at the table from all levels of stakeholders. And if we do not listen and learn about these solutions, the granularity of these solutions, the context specificity of these solutions for different geographies, for different population groups, then it's going to be very difficult to get solutions that we can scale and that can have an impact on food systems and those who work and depend on food systems. So that's my second point about the solutions. And the third point that I want to make is that I do think we find reasonable and easy ways to measure success. Success up to the summit, because you look at the number of people, the number of hours that are going into the preparations of the summit. So success up to the summit, success at the summit, and success beyond the summit. And we must be able to document this and we must be able to measure this and to also use this going forward beyond the summit in September 2021. With respect to the action track 4 that I represent, which is equitable livelihoods, there are certain issues that I hope that we are working towards and we hope to reach. And the first one is sustaining and growing jobs, especially in all sectors of the food summit, and also taking into consideration women and youth. The second is fair wages for all across the food systems. And again, taking into consideration that many of those who are vulnerable and are left behind are women within the food systems. And the third point that I would like to raise is that we have many who are poor and vulnerable working within food systems. And if we would have to work to get equitable livelihoods for them, we need to reduce the risks, and risks with respect to seasonality, risks with respect to shocks, as we have now with the COVID pandemic. And within the equitable livelihoods action track, we need equity in value across the food systems. So it's not just about the quantity of foods we produce, but it's, as Joachim mentioned, also reducing the loss and the waste so that we have increased supplies. And it's also in quality, and both the social and the economic aspects, the nutritional value, and the safety of foods. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Chacontala. And then we come to Salim Haq. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I was very impressed by all the different 7 feedbacks. It was obvious that a very rich discussion had taken place and that there are a lot of things happening. So I am very keen that we don't reinvent wheels where a wheel already exists. Although we do want to do game changing, on the other hand, we don't want to do reinvention of wheels. So we certainly look forward to building on what they've done. The particular feedback that we had from David Nabarro, who is our Food Systems Summit person who is going to be leading on the national dialogues that are going to be taking place for the Food Systems Summit, in my view, is an extremely important element where we will be able to hear from countries what is happening at the country level, because I think the one size cannot fit all mantra is absolutely essential to keep in mind here. We can come up with all kinds of ideas about what is good for the whole world, and we'll find that it is not good for certain parts of the world and certainly not good for certain parts of society, particularly the poorest and the most vulnerable. They tend to be at the short end of any good idea that is put forward. And so to me, the message for the Food System Summit Action Tracks, plural, 5 of us, as well as the science group and my group as well, is that we need to be listening to as many different sources of knowledge and information as possible, different stakeholder groups, different countries, different stakeholder groups within different countries, and being open to hearing from them what they think is needed, and more importantly, finding some good ideas that are already being championed or done or piloted that we can then build on. To me, a game-changing idea doesn't have to be something that has to be started anew. It could be something that is happening at a good level in a small scale, and how do we then scale it up? And if I can just add a final point from my own experience, which is working on with vulnerable communities to the impacts of climate change, there are many examples of vulnerable communities taking action themselves, which is what we work on. And the issue then is, how do we support them? And in the climate change context, we work, my center and my colleagues, we work on what we call locally led adaptation and resilience building. focusing on how do we empower and enable the most vulnerable communities, whether they be food producers in the food context or food consumers in the urban centers. They're equally important for us to take into account. And as I said, to me, they are my clients. They're the ones I want to help if I'm going to do some food system summit. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Salimul. I give the floor back to Ajay, who wants to add one point concerning the farmers, please.
So thank you for this. Thank you, Chair, for this. I want to raise a little controversial point by saying that even scientific evidence needs a re-evaluation. It's generally in all discussions it comes up that we need affordable food for consumers. But farmers believe, and they have seen that in a quest for affordable food for consumers by nations, majority of world's farmers do not receive a fair price for their produce. And that's a trade-off that needs to be addressed. And if farmers don't receive a fair price for their produce, they will not adopt environmentally sustainable practices to achieve a net zero. So this is something that needs to be balanced: affordable food versus fair prices for farmers' produce. And in the same way, if I try and speak on behalf of farmers in the global south, they believe that a lot of their problems arise because of the World Trade Organization, and they feel that treaties are made for the global good, are not sacrosanct. And if we realize that majority of the world's farmers are not benefiting, then it's time to relook at those issues. The things like this that the Food System Summit will be discussing. We will not be running away from anything. Farmers also worry that a lot of money is going to be made available, because I believe the Food System Summit is going to be a success for changing food systems. And that money should not just be channelized through private sector. It should come to farmers, communities, fishers, and everyone directly. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much, Ajay, for this important add. I think this voice of the farmers and the affordable food and fair price will be really a very important aspect. The farmer is a part of the solution and not the problem. So I think that's the point we must look at. So I think we come to the next part of our session, third part. There we have some questions and answers. I collected some questions and I will ask them, and then ask one or two of you to give a short answer to these questions. There is one question we received in terms of food system. What role do nutrition-specific interventions play in the Food System Summit? This question is maybe a topic of the track 1 to Sheryl Hendricks, and then maybe 2 to track 5, Salim Haq. So first I give the floor to you, Sheryl.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for the question. Yes, clearly both nutrition sensitive and nutrition specific interventions play a very crucial role in addressing nutrition issues, and both have to be looked at very carefully and to find the most sustainable ways of being able to address them. Certainly there are multiple points in the food system and in looking at sustainable food systems where specifically these nutrition sensitive approaches can be adopted, but we need to move them beyond simply looking at production solutions around nutrition sensitive components, and move the discussion further along the food system as to how do we look at the preservation, the storage, and the consumption of foods in a more nutrition sensitive way. So certainly we're looking for more innovative ideas as to how this can be woven into the food system as a whole. So much of the current conversation stops at the production element, but we need to move far beyond that.
Thank you, Sheryl.
Thank you.
And you, Salimul, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll just build on what Sheryl said in the sense that from a resilience perspective, it is very much the entire spectrum from food production to food consumption. And as I said, from again, the resilience perspective, vulnerabilities, shock stresses of the most vulnerable is the normative group that we need to be thinking of. They are the people that we need to think of both on the production side, the ones that are most vulnerable, and on the consumption side. From continent to continent, from country to country, and we need to have a very good analysis. And I hope that our science colleagues will be able to help us with this very refined, if you like, geographic distribution of where these different populations are and what their specific needs that need to be addressed in those circumstances are. Because in this particular case, the mantra of one size fit all will simply not work. It has to be, very specific to the location and the type of problems that they are suffering from. Thank you.
So thank you very much. A second question. The question is, how can we ensure that sustainable or nature-positive production is linked to healthy diets? Maybe this question is one of track 3. I would like to give the floor to Joao, please.
Thank you so much, Chair. When we tend to think about nature-positive production, we take a farm-to-fork approach, right? And, in which farmers and fishers everywhere bear the burden of the responsibility to change the food system. But this question, and I'm very, very happy it was asked, it changes this logic a bit, because instead of farm to fork, it's from form to farm. And I have a strong belief that there is power in what we put on our plates every day. If you look at what the food system is doing to human health, and if we only knew that there is a way, a meaningful and feasible way of choosing food, our diets better, so it's better for our health and for the environment, it would be amazing. Even WWF, for example, we have a platform that was launched about 2 weeks ago. It's called Planet-Based Diets, and it assesses the impact of our diets on nature and on human health, and it provides elements for you to choose better foods. And by better, I mean better for you and better for the environment. My dream, would be that consumer choice and the power that is on our plates of those who can afford to eat 3 times a day, unfortunately it's not everybody, can inform production choices, not only on the types of foods that are produced, but on the quality that goes into production systems. Like, let's remove deforestation and conversion of natural ecosystems for food production. Let's protect our environments. Let's choose foods that are produced in the right way for nature and for people. And let's rebuild the ecosystems that have been degraded for food production in other ways. So I think, there is true power on consumer choice to inform decisions made by the farmers and fishers. Over.
So thank you very much, Joao. There is a question for Joachim. Joachim, there is the question, shouldn't we strengthen the CFS high-level panel of experts? So this scientific point you mentioned, if we should strengthen it with experts. Please, Joachim.
By all means, the CFS has done an excellent job. It was strengthened and created after the food crisis of 2008 and 2009. And that needs to continue. The CFS is an important body appointed by the UN agencies and nominated by government. The model which I have proposed to model an IP food after IPCC does not bring together 24 capable scientists, but tens of thousands of scientists are mobilized and are engaging at national, regional, and global level in solution-oriented discussions with stakeholders. That's what we need. So we need the CFS and we need a broad mobilization of the science communities. For instance, we have already through the scientific group for the UN Food System Summit mobilized the academies of science. There are 140 or so academies of science worldwide, and they have agreed to join forces with us in the professional associations, say the nutritionists, there are 10,000 members in the Union of Nutritionists, or the soil scientists. We need them all in a structured way, and we need a CFS to shape the dialogue with its base in FAO.
So thank you very much. There is a question to Ajay. The question is, how do we ensure that consumer behavior follows suit?
Thank you for that. It's the question that Action Track 2 will be delivering ideas on. And what we need to do is we need to enable, empower, and motivate consumers to shift to a healthy diet. And we'll be crowdsourcing ideas on this. But basically, we are looking at behavior change issues. We're looking at, and behavior change incorporates ideas of cultural components into diets and habits which will differ from place to place. We're looking at volunteered commitments from the private sector, from the government, about increasing plant-based diets of fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts. We're looking at ideas on how you can curb excessive consumption of animal-sourced foods in the developed world, while also reducing consumption of foods high in fat, sugar, and salt. There are suggestions coming in from different sections which are saying that we must impose a tax on food, or we educate children. How do you get into a transition economy where you can half the food waste? I mean, 1/3 of the food is being wasted. So all these issues are there, and basically we need to work on consumers, because farmers do not grow what they want to grow. They either grow what the market demands or what government public policy incentivizes. So consumers being the bigger force than the government, I think, if we are able to change consumer habits, their demands, farmers will change practices accordingly, and we'll have a better, safer world to live in.
I see some participants are agreeing with that. Joao, you want to add anything to this question?
No, if I had to add anything, I would repeat what Ajay just said. So it's amazing. So we can move to other questions. Thank you.
Good. Then we go to our next question. She's for Chacontala. The question is, how can we ensure that the voices of vulnerable and marginal people will be heard by global leaders? Please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I do think there's growing recognition that all voices are to be heard. So there is a growing understanding and willingness to have all voices at the table, to listen to, and also to be heard. One of the ways that I have seen, if I give an example with women working along in the lake regions of Africa who work with the processing of fish. I've seen very strong associations and very strong groups that get together and where they can elevate their voices as one group and not just as single individuals. And then looking for solutions, they do that together as a group. For example, I've seen quite successful groups who move away from sun drying of fish to solar drying of fish. This they won't have been able to do if they didn't get together and work as a group. So these are so I do think by having the agency not only of the individual, but agencies of groups and communities and associations, and elevating their voice at the table, we can reach far. And then they come with solutions that are more context specific and can give us ideas as to how these solutions can be used for others with the same issues or under the same circumstances, but even with tweaking and adaptation can then be transformed into solutions that match the needs of others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also heard about COVID crisis. There is a question if the COVID crisis would not have happened at the moment, what would be the influence? So would it be another summit, or is this crisis we are in at the moment, does it influence this food summit? I maybe give the question to Salim.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, indeed. This is the heart of the resilience question of Action Track 5, of dealing with shocks. So my interpretation of or answer to the COVID question and interpretation of what it means for us is that obviously it is a huge negative shock on the system, the global system, the health system, the economic system, and the food system. On the other hand, every shock is also an opportunity. And right now we need to be thinking of opportunities as we come out of the COVID situation of doing things better than they were before. And the notion that business as usual was okay is wrong. Business as usual was not okay. It was certainly not resilient. And so what we need to be thinking of is how do we make the future post-COVID economy broadly, food systems within that, a much more resilient pathway, country by country in their national plans, and then across countries in the global plans. And to just pick up on what Chacontala said, I think the window of opportunity is there to challenge orthodoxy, to bring the voices of the most vulnerable forward, but that door can slam shut very quickly. And so we should not be complacent, and we need to use this opportunity to push the door wider, the opportunity wider, to make it more effective, because it's very easy for decision makers to go back to the old ways very, very quickly. And when you look at some of the ways in which money is now being allocated, there are actually quite a few bad ways in which they are going back to the old ways. Some good ones, but also not so good ones as well. So I think the opportunity is certainly there. This next year, 2021, is the beginning of a new decade. It's a post-COVID world that we are entering, full of opportunity. I'm hopeful that the Food Summit, System Summit, will make a difference in moving us in a better direction than we were before. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim. Is anybody that wants to add something to this question? Yes, please, Joachim.
Just as a footnote, I fully agree with Chairman. The big impact of COVID-19 crisis is also felt in science, and the role of science, and the listening to science, and the trust in science. That has increased tremendously. Yes, there are folks who negate the science insights, but they are a minority. So that has ripple effects for our evidence-based and science-driven agenda for the Food Systems Summit as well. We feel it. The demands on science, on the science community, have tremendously increased, and we need to live up to that. But we have a new relationship between science and society in a positive sense.
Thank you. Joachim? Maybe there was another point mentioned that from Ajay, that fair price for the produce or true cost value accounting are a key part of sustainable food systems. These are also discussions we have here in Switzerland, for example. And the question is, or there is all, they say that fair food has a too high price. So maybe to you, Ajay, are there any experience in how, if you want to change the system, how it is possible? Maybe then also the question to Joachim concerning the voice of experts or the scientific answer to this question. Please, Ajay.
The problem of giving a fair price to farmers is that food value chains are driving down cost of farm produce, of farm gate prices. And we need to recognize that the cost of growing a food in a particular season is much different than the real cost of growing food, which adds to climate change, which adds to degradation of soils and other issues. So I, as a farmer, personally think that consumers need to get ready to pay a higher price for food that they have. This habit of paying very low prices, lower prices than production cost, real cost of food is what is driving climate change. And I think the money to do that transformation should come from the energy sector, sovereign wealth funds, private equity who own energy stocks, and despot rulers in Middle East and everywhere. We need to get them to pay for this transformation. Those are the people. And this, I just want to take another point on the farmers' behalf, that this whole idea that farmers are responsible for climate change, yes, we are a part of the problem, but we have become a bigger part of the problem than we are because the energy sector is directing the conversations and narratives against us. We need to get them back into this. I mean, this is not the point of this debate, but this is very important. Those responsible are not being held responsible as they should be held responsible. That's where the money is going to come in for the transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. Joachim?
Yeah, thank you. A sustainable and well-functioning food system needs functioning markets. Markets don't function by themselves. They need rules. The rule that is missing is that currently prices are excluding the indirect negative effects of food production. They exist. We call this externalities. They need to be included. Secondly, it's not only the level of price which is important to keep in mind. The most important aspect for poor people and low-income farmers is the volatility of price. The volatility which uninsured people cannot deal with. So stabilizing schemes, which also create inefficiencies, are needed for. So number one, I would warn to take the market out of the price formation in the food system. We need that. We need efficient price formation, but it needs to be true price, factoring in externalities, and we need help to deal with volatilities that hits the poorest the hardest.
Thank you, Joachim. Does anybody want to add something? No, so there I have another question. How do we ensure that the private sector, including small and medium enterprises, will take an active part in the transformation? I think I will give this question to Sheryl.
Yes, as highlighted by many of the chairs of the sessions, we need to make sure that it is everybody's responsibility. So the establishment of these transparent accountability systems and ensuring that the externalities are accounted for in the system are the start for making sure that everybody does take responsibility for ensuring these elements. Yeah, so it's going to take a whole system approach, a whole system accountability, and a great deal of transparency to hold each other accountable, the different stakeholders holding each other accountable in the long run. Thanks.
Thank you. Is anybody else want to add?
Yes, if I could
Yes, please,
add my bit. So picking up on this thread of the conversation and Ajay's point about who pays for this, I would also re-emphasize the point that in the context of the climate change problem that we are seeing, a transformation away from fossil fuels is of the essence, and the impacts of climate change are overwhelmingly on the poorest, most vulnerable people, both farmers in the rural areas as well as slum dwellers in the urban areas. And therefore, if we are going to make corrections in the so-called green recovery plans that are being developed, some have some good parts, as I said, but also have some very bad parts, going back to, allowing these fossil fuel companies to go back to business as usual. That simply, to me, is a recipe for disaster, and they need to be made to pay. In the climate change, convention process, we call this something that the vulnerable countries are pushing for in the upcoming Conference of Parties, COP26, that will take place next year. And it's a really serious issue. And if we were able to get some level of compensation and funding there, one of the places where it could very reasonably apply would be through the vulnerable farmers, the small and medium enterprises as well in the private sector, who are going to be under heavy risk from the impacts of climate change and need to be supported to be able to deal with that impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim. So there is another question about the medias, maybe a question for Chacontala. The media have an important role to play in shifting food consumption patterns. On which track will they be explicitly involved? How should science deal with this? It's maybe to Chacontala and then also to Joachim.
Well, it was really good to hear some of the speakers talk about that in transforming food systems, in making them better to serve, that in the past, there was much focus on starting with production and inputs for production. And by the time you'd reach to the value chains and to the consumption, everybody's tired or has fallen asleep. So you never get that part of the food systems taken into consideration. I do really hope that we can use the planning and preparation for the food systems to try to get the balance so that we not only have the push from the production systems and inputs for production, but a pull from the consumers, the behavior of consumers, and all the factors that are important for consumers in their aspirations, in their choices, and how they make their decisions. And we know that advertisements, we know that the knowledge that is received by all different sources, now the younger generation use many other platforms in which to get their information. This is extremely important, and this affects the consumption patterns and can give you a really meaningful pull that moves the whole system and transform the whole system. If I would give an example from Cambodia, where we've done some studies in rural areas, and you ask among households what's the most important factor for getting nutritious foods to your children, they overwhelmingly talk about the convenience, the ease of access, the ease of preparation, and how you feed a child. It's much easier to give a child a few coins and let that child go to the nearest market to buy a packet of biscuits, rather than to sit for the half an hour to make the porridge, get the ingredients for a porridge, make the porridge, and take the half an hour that is needed to feed the child a bowl of porridge. So if we do not take into consideration where consumers are today and where they're going to be tomorrow in what they see as important, it's going to be very difficult to change the food systems. And in this consideration, we must consider different population groups. For example, the youth and also the elderly, which is a growing part of the whole consumer group. Thank you.
Thank you, and then you, Joachim.
This is the first time that a food system summit or food summit happens in advanced digital age. We have to factor that in. It's a different game. Of course, we know that many low-income people don't have access to digital information, not even to telephony. So that is becoming a human rights issue as part of access to market and production relevant information and health information. But the opportunity is big. The Food System Summit has to factor in the opportunities to invest in inclusive digitization for a well-informed small farmer and farming community, traders and consumers. Must not be left to the supermarkets alone to be well-informed.
Thank you, Joachim. Salimul, you want to add something, I see.
Yes, please, if I can. I just want to pick up on this thread of the conversation, which is, communications, the potential of a new digital social media world different from the old media world, and the link to youth. I think young people are going to be a key element in any kind of transformation that we want to see going forward. And one of the good things that I feel very, glad about in our action tracks is each of the action tracks has a youth vice chair, and they are very active. And I'm in fact feeling extremely humbled by how active they are. And to me is a game changer in itself. Is bringing the young people on board, not as people that we want to tell what to do, but to listen to them and let them tell us what they want us to do, and then we have to respond to them. And again, I bring my experience in the climate change world, because that's where I work most of my time, is the example of Greta Thunberg, this 16-year-old Swedish girl who has changed the young people all over the world and brought them together. If we can harness that on the food systems, I think that would be another great opportunity coming out of the Food System Summit, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salimul. There was a question about supermarkets, and we heard before about it, so I take it. The question is, maybe she's to Sheryl, how can we address the role that supermarkets and the retail sector plays? Much of the price is determined by large agri-food companies that also held a large a large power over the global food supply chain. So the question is, what can we do there? Sheryl.
So this is where accountability and transparency and the power of consumer pressure can come into play. As Ajay said, the power is in the hands of the consumers and what we put on our plates. And so we vote every day in the marketplace. So we have, as consumers, there are many more consumers than producers. We have the power to shape the future and to decide what it is we want to put on our plates and in our mouths and what form that comes in. So undoubtedly, supermarkets have played a role in distributing food across the world, and the global trade system has its role to play in helping to redistribute food across the world. But it's time that we looked at particularly what is in the food that's on the shelves of those supermarkets and the role that that plays in bringing cheaper food to people, but also the health implications and many of the unintended consequences of driving that narrative around cheaper food. So this is a window of opportunity for us to start looking at that and to use the power of communication to get people to think a little bit before they fill their mouths with food as to what the potential health implications are and the choices that we are making. Yeah, so I think there's a lot that can be brought to the surface through these conversations, but ultimately every stakeholder, including the consumer, has a vote in the food system, and we need to take our responsibility seriously. Thank you.
Good. I see that there are some of you want to add something. First, Ajay, please.
This question was raised on large food companies controlling the food systems. I think the great fear going forward, as we have seen in the last 10, 15 years, that there's a consolidation in the food value chain. If you look at the agriculture input companies that makes the pesticides and fertilizers, if you look at the commodity aggregators, if you look at the retailers or those who own the brands, in every segment, there are just 5 or 6 players which will land up controlling 60% of the organized space. And that, I think, is going to pose major problems on how we evolve. And the only thing I want to add is in one of the sessions where Joao was also there, I think, I said, trust the food systems to deliver. And a colleague corrected me, and very rightly so, and he said, don't trust us. Put pressure on us, keep that pressure on, and only then you get delivery. So I would say to the audience, please keep the pressure on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. Joao, you were mentioned.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think food retailers, or large and small, not only the large, should pay attention also to how much food is wasted. Because food waste and food loss, account for a huge part of greenhouse gas emissions. I think it was in the order of 8%. Food retailers everywhere need to control for this, and one way to do this is to set their targets, about how much they will prevent being wasted, how much food they will prevent being wasted. Second is actually measure those targets that they set for themselves, measure their performance, And third, report. Because, if we don't control food waste, it's not only greenhouse gas emissions, but it's like fresh water that is going into the bin. It's people's labor that we are throwing away. It's livelihoods that are impacted, not to mention that we will have to produce more food. So if we can alleviate somehow, and with the help of retailers, large and small, the amount of food that goes to the bin, we would be sparing nature of much sacrifice. So I just like to leave that message out there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And Chacontala, you also want to mention something to that question, please?
Yes, I'd like to make a point here, which I've seen work in. If I give 2 examples of countries, one Denmark and the other Bangladesh, that national food-based recommendations can play a really big role as to how food systems are shaped and formed. And if you take the national food recommendations, food-based recommendations in Denmark, they shape the education, starting all the way from the kindergartens as to what's on the plates of young children, in schools, in hospitals, in prisons. And it can have a tremendous effect if it's used properly and comes with some degree of consistency, and that people believe in these national recommendations, and it can have far-reaching consequences. I've seen the same also in Bangladesh. Bangladesh has been very good at setting up their food-based national guidelines, and they're using it now, for example, in their school feeding programs. It's being used in the rations that are given to the refugees in Cox's Bazar. So this instrument can go a long way in transforming food systems, and has the backing of the government as well as communities and within the scientific groups and the way that it's used. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I think it was really a very good discussion. We had a lot of topics we mentioned. It's almost time for me to close this part of the session or of the discussion. But before I do so, I would like to invite each panelist to say in 20 seconds what is in their view the key action to transform food systems by 2030. So I give the first floor to Joachim, please.
It's absolutely critical that we address any trade-offs by innovation and by compensation, rather than getting bogged down to talk about trade-offs and don't mobilize for the investment and the finance to get the job done. Secondly, a sustainable food system is part of a sustainable economic system. We cannot come to a sustainable food system without looking at the economic system to be a sustainable, more bio-based, circular economy. So that's what we need
Thank
to
you,
drive
Joachim.
for. Thank
then
you.
to Sheryl, please.
Thank you so much. So for Action Track 1, the critical part about changing the discussion and that we're delighted to be part of is making sure that nutrition becomes a topic for conversation as much as climate change does. And so in the design and redesign and transformation of food systems, that nutrition is central in discussions about trade-offs, as well as the economic, social and environmental components of food system transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheryl. Then to Ajay, please.
I think the choices we make in what we eat and what is wasted will decide what we leave for our children, grandchildren, and future generations. We must beware that we don't get bogged down in negotiating settlements with the system. And I would just want to leave the last message by saying, don't forget farmers. They are the center of the system to deliver the food systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. Joao, please.
Yeah, I'll pick up where AJ left, talking about farmers. We are 9 harvests away from delivering or missing the Sustainable Development Agenda. So we better make sure that we use this short window meaningfully. So I really invite everyone to come on board Action Track 3, where we propose to do 3 things. One is to protect natural ecosystems against new conversions for food production. Second is to manage food production systems sustainably to the benefit of people and nature. And third, restore and rehabilitate degraded ecosystems and soil function for sustainable production. I really would like to welcome everyone on board our Action Track.
Thank you, Joao.
Thank you.
And then to Chacontala, please.
Thank you, Chair. In the first point I would make is a general point. I really do think that we have to find the ways to get different groups of people at the table to talk and to be listened to. And we just don't say it. We, the ones who have the resources and have the means to assist, that we find the ways to bring them in, and we find the ways to encourage them, and we find the ways to give them voices, not just say it should be done. That assistance is given from the, I would say, from the haves to the have-nots, or else we aren't going to have a food system transformation that does well for all. With respect to Action Track 4 on equitable livelihoods, I really think it's important we consider fair wages for all of those who work within the food systems, and that we take into consideration different groups, for example, women, indigenous people, and youth, to give three examples. And that when we look at having equitable livelihoods for those within food systems, that we think about ways in which we can reduce the risks for the poorest and the most vulnerable who are within the food systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Chacontala, and then to Salimul, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the issue of resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks and stresses is very broad and covers many things. But if I had to choose the top two areas that I think we should be focusing on and have opportunities for breakthroughs, are in the short term, immediately over the course of the next few months into the summit and immediately after the summit, is the COVID-19 crisis and the economic outcomes of the crisis and the turnaround after the crisis. So as I said earlier, to me, that's a big opportunity for us to embed a new kind of food system investment strategy going forward that is more resilient from the perspective of enhancing resilience. And then in the slightly longer term, coming out of the summit and going forward to the next 5 to 10 years, it's making it resilient to the impacts of climate change. Because this year, 2020, in my view, is going to be remembered not just for being the year of COVID-19, but also the year in which we are stepping into a climate changed world. We are seeing from super cyclones in our part of the world to super wildfires in California and Australia to impacts all over the world, which are now attributable to human-induced climate below above one degree. And we are entering into a decade of these kinds of impacts, and we're going to have to deal with them on a much more systemic and systematic manner. Hopefully, we'll be able to build our resilience to them over time. Thank you.
So many thanks once again to all panelists for your valuable contributions. Today's discussion on the necessary measures for food systems transformation indeed proved very fruitful. I thought this was really a great discussion. I took a little bit a longer time that it was planned, but I think it was it worth. I think they allowed to put value all the rich discussions we have had over the past 2 weeks, and I believe we were also able to provide our panelists today with some substantial thought for food, thereby achieving our aim to feed the conclusions of the conference into the 2021 Food System Summit process. Now, before we close this session, I would like to give the floor to Roberto Azofeiva from the Ministry of Livestock and Agriculture of Costa Rica to present the outcome document of the conference. Roberto, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, now you can see the presentation. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It is a great honor for me to now present to you the outcome document of...
Sorry, Roberto, we can really not see it doesn't work. We can hear you and see you personally, but not the slide. Maybe you should open the PowerPoint.
I'm sharing the presentation. Now, can you see?
No.
Let me try it again. Sorry for this inconvenient. Now, okay. Now it's okay?
No.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened.
Maybe somebody from the technique, can somebody help?
Share screen, share screen. Application window. And now.
Now we see your
Okay, you can
compute
yeah,
your
okay.
your screen, but now
Okay.
you just change to the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Now?
Wait a second.
It's okay now?
You should open it again. We see your Explorer, and we see that you make a double tip again to the PowerPoint.
Now?
Open only the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Only the PowerPoint open. Now we see your screen.
Now, can you see the presentation?
No.
Oh.
Do you see it on your screen?
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, maybe you just tell.
Okay.
Without PowerPoint.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for this mistake. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It is a great honor for me to now present to you the outcome document of this third global conference on the Sustainable Food System Program. This is the result of all the incredible rich discussion that took place over these past 10 days. The document consists of a series of recommendations that originate from each of the conference's thematic sessions as summarized by session chairs. They are intended as input to the 2021 Food System Summit. The document was skillfully brought together by a drafting committee, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of them for their hard work. I'm now going to introduce the recommendation sessions session by session. In session 2, look at aligning collective action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The session's key recommendations included that food systems should be embedded in all relevant multilateral frameworks. Countries and other actors working on different multilateral frameworks that have a nexus through food should actively coordinate to ensure coherence. All levels of government should seek to coordinate food system decision making and action through appropriate institutional arrangements. The creation of participatory multi-stakeholder mechanisms can both support coordination efforts and may contribute to the assessment of trade-offs, and food systems governance should address current power imbalances and actively work to engage the most marginalized stakeholders. In session 3, examine the science of characterizing and assessing the transition toward sustainable food systems. The recommendations of this session include that because food systems are dynamic, it is important to keep productive dialogue between scientists, practitioners, and policymakers. Standardized indicators and models to ensure sustainability should meet both scientific rigor and intuitive simplicity. Trade-offs need to be identified and seriously considered in order to inform policy decisions, and successful evaluation and management of trade-offs requires active inclusion of all stakeholders. In session 4, discuss the need to move toward a holistic assessment of food systems policies. The recommendation of the session 4 included that Food systems transformation processes require the highest level political commitment. Furthermore, it requires policies that promote sustainability along the entire value chain, taking into the account that all dimensions of sustainable development. Such policies need to be designed with a holistic approach within the overall framework of the right to food, while carefully balancing facts, interests, and trade-offs can be best addressed by establishing or actively linking inclusive multi-stakeholder bodies to the policy-making process. In session 5, look at the investment side in food system transformation. The session's key recommendations included: investors should redirect financial flows away from harmful practices and work together to better align public and private finance. Financing models and products should be developed to support viable business models for actors using or transitioning to sustainable practices. Concepts such as true cost accounting and associated tools should be used to identify investment that increase positive outcomes in food and agriculture. And governments should address systemic barriers to catalyze finance and create an enable environment for ambitious, integrated capital investment. Session 6 examine the role of consumers in food systems. The recommendation of these sessions are: there is a need to ensure that consumers are engaged as active players in the food systems, and their perspective is effectively taken into account. Promoting consumer information and education are key ingredients for enable consumer awareness and behavioral change. And there is a need to promote the use of tools to communicate sustainability information on food products and services in a reliable and clear way. In session 7, it was discussed effective ways to leverage public procurement to accelerate sustainable development goals implementation. The recommendation in this session 7 are: public food procurement can promote the production and consumption of sustainable and healthy meals while providing livelihoods to small food suppliers. The education system should be prioritized as a setting for sustainable and healthy food system transformation. Governments should implement laws and policies that stipulate both nutritional and sustainability procurement requirements for school meals. An important immediate next step would be to confirm joint recommendations to inform the design of school meals programs and the 2021 Food System Summit should promote the development of a global framework for action to ensure sustainable and healthy school meals for all school-aged children. We call upon all countries and other relevant stakeholders to implement these recommendations in their own national context and to introduce them into other relevant processes, including, in particular, the United Nations Food System Summit in 2021. Thank you so much, and all the best for all.
Thank you very much, Roberto, for presenting this outcome document. No problem about technical questions.
Sorry.
It can happen to everybody, no problem. Thank you very much. And for everybody, the document is already on the conference platform. You can get it there and read it again. And the second thing on the platform is also a survey to provide your feedback to the whole conference. It would be nice if we have a lot of feedbacks and to see what we can do for our next conference better. Thank you very much. Now it is time for me to proceed with the wrap up and closing of the conference. But before doing so, I would like to get back on the question that Agnes Kalibata, the special envoy for the Food System Summit 2021, raised in the opening of the first Global Food System Summit dialogue that was hosted by this conference 2 days ago. She asked us, what is most important to you with regards to the Food System Summit? And second, how can the Food System Summit process take advantage of the dialogues at global and national level? Now, of course, I cannot speak on behalf of this entire conference, but maybe my personal view. The most important thing is that the summit leads to concrete and bold actions that will be taken up by countries, cities, and food systems actors all over the world. Only then we will see the real transformation. So this post-conference action is the most important thing. Strategies is one thing, action in the countries is the other very important part of this process. Second, global dialogues like the one on Tuesday, but also this entire conference, help to shape such transformative actions. And the multi-stakeholder dialogues that are happening at national will help to tailor them to the local contexts. These dialogues are important occasions and opportunities to listen to each other, learn from each other, and to understand the other's interests and worries related to the changes ahead. Only understanding each other will allow us to find solutions that leave no one behind. It is also in this spirit that we will submit the recommendations of this outcome document to Dr. Kalibata, as well as the Summit Action Tracks chairs and the chair of the scientific group, so that they can be used in the Food System Summit process. Furthermore, I encourage all participants to support the broader distribution of the outcome document through relevant channels and other international forums. The document, as I said, is already available on the conference platform. Before I close this conference, I would like to express my gratitude to all speakers as well as the audience for your active and engaged participation over the past 2 weeks, which have made this conference a success. I am confident that together we have taken a decisive step forward towards the transformation of our food systems and the achievement of the 17 goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I look forward to seeing you all again at the Food System Summit next year. With this promising conclusion, I close the third global conference of the One Planet Network's Sustainable Food Systems Programme. Thank you very much and bye.